Faith wasn't a big part of my life. I was baptized outside of the church. In childhood, my family had become Catholic, but it was never anything that was foundational in my own sort of understanding of who I was. I had witnessed my mom's conversion to the faith, and so there was definitely some seeds planted in that in my childhood growing up. I wasn't practicing my faith in college. I hadn't finished the sacraments of initiation within the church, and yeah, I was definitely kind of away in that moment from the practice of the faith in terms of going to church and things like that. I just joined a fraternity, and in fact, after that summer, one of the crazy things that happened is I was living in a fraternity house, and I was trying to live two lives essentially. The one hand, God had changed my life, and I was trying to respond to that call. I was trying to respond to that change in my life. On the other hand, I still had the same relationships as I had before the summer. And so trying to balance that and trying to maybe make two spaces for those two things was a good learning experience for me, because I realized that when God changes your life, he changes your entire life. And in that sense, it's going to change a lot of your relationships. It's going to change. And not to say that we should be afraid of that. And I definitely was. I was afraid of losing certain relationships. I was afraid of losing because, these people who I was friends with, they weren't Christians, they weren't practicing any sort of faith. And so I felt like, well, God is taking these people away from me and changing my attitude and changing my desires, essentially. There was a lot of fear surrounding that. And that took a long time to move through. But again, at the end of the day, it was that realization that, at the center of who we are, at the center of our interiority is the best friend that you'll ever have. As the one who created you. He's the one who's always with you. And he's the one who, even when you mess up, is merciful and will help you move through those difficult times. Well, I think what happens for most people when they're living a double life is that it all comes crashing down, and that's what happened to me. I basically failed a bunch of classes that semester. I think it was I was doing too much. I was doing too much, and and the thing that fell out of my priorities was my studies and being in college. So it was sort of like trying to develop a relationship with people at church, as well as trying to continuing my relationships with my fraternity brothers, that social life. And it's not to say that my social life caused me to fail my classes. I think it was really just sort of, there's a lot going on inside of me, and school was the least of my worries. Until it became the center of my worries in the sense of failing 3 classes in 1 semester. In the summertime, after all that happened, I was introduced to a lot of for the first time, Catholic friends, and I think that was also a big help in sort of framing myself within the context of what was going on in my life at the time, in the sense that, maybe these friendships that I have now won't be lasting, but God is going to provide people in a sense, a community for me in order to move forward, and to live the life that he's calling me to. And so I think that was a big help for me as well. There was, after that summer and meeting those people, there was less of that need or that impetus to live 2 lives, in a sense of, okay, I have to have friends, I have to have relationships, I have to have a community of some kind. But at the same time, God has asked me to do something more. And so eventually, God provides, and that community comes, and you enter into it. And then some of that turmoil kind of dissipates, in a sense. When you have a conversion experience, I think there's a desire to do something with it. It was June 21st, 2008. I mean, I can point to the exact time, so there's a sense in which I can point to a particular moment where this all happened. Yeah, I have that aspect of it, and there was something that kind of, maybe it's a little bit extraordinary, that happened in my situation. I was working in this laboratory at the Texas Medical Center, and I was working in an all Portuguese speaking lab. And so the only time that anyone would be speaking English was when they were telling me to do something. And so again, that sort of isolating experience. And so I hated the work. I hated the job. I was always trying to get out of it. And well, anyway, I went to a bookstore after work one day, and I just found myself, as a used bookstore, I found myself in kind of the section where people with a lot of questions end up, and it's the kind of the religion and the philosophy and the self-help, all of that sort of stuff. And the idea of going back to church was something that was kind of in my head, and I knew that my mom and dad were practicing Catholics, and so I didn't know anything about church. Literally, I'd been to mass before, but I didn't know anything fundamental about it. So I picked up Catholicism for Dummies. Yeah, and I got to the section really on the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, and there was a realization there that, like, oh, this is what I need. this is what I need, and this is why I'm going to become Catholic. The idea that Jesus is present in the Eucharist substantially, that he is there, that's Jesus, is something that clicked with me, and there was a realization of I need him, and that tangibility of receiving him in communion was something that there was just a recognition. Well, overnight reading, I read that book in one night. I stayed up all night and I went to mass the next morning. And that's why I think for me, in terms of my own conversion, it was akin to falling in love, because you don't always understand kind of what's going on in the midst of that. And I had been in relationships before, but I had never felt anything in that sense. Just sort of that the desire to be fulfilled. Years pass by. I'm continuing to practice my faith. I move out of the fraternity house. It was through a very wise priest who recognizes something in me. He suggests that I go to seminary, and he thought that I could be called to a priest, and so he invited me to discern that more deeply by entering the seminary and to further that discernment. And so I moved back into the fraternity house for the summer because I needed a place to live. There was a Monday morning in August that I packed up, moved 9 a.m., moved out of the fraternity house, and by 3 p.m. was moving into my room at the seminary. And so that was a whole nother, stage of my life, and growing in the realization of what, kind of things becoming clearer of what exactly God was calling me to. And this is one of those things is like, you wonder like why God brought you through certain periods of your life. Like, why did God bring me to a fraternity house, or what was the purpose of that period of my life? I think one of the purposes of it was to help me to realize how God wanted me to live the life that he was calling me to in the context of a community. And that was something that had been kind of formed in me as a college student, as a man living in a college fraternity. That they're not, college fraternities aren't all bad. There's some good to them, and one of those goods, I think, is that depending on your brothers, and also being depended upon. And so that was something that I think had become a part of me, had been formed in me, and there was sort of a desire to live that for the rest of my life. And so that's how I found religious life, which is a life that is kind of centered around living in community to the service of the church.